How am I supposed to do that?
Hit him where it hurts.
Willie Watt was your typical nerdy high schooler who was seen as an outcast at his school, going unnoticed most of the time, and when he is noticed, it's never for something good. Willie also had a long-lasting infatuation with fellow classmate Blade Summer, who truthfully couldn't even remember his name. However, that still didn't affect his feelings for her. Something else of note is that Willie's dad is verbally, mentally, and physically abusive and even encourages the negative feelings that Willie harbors inside. What this tells us is, Willie grew up in an unstable home, obviously, but this abuse is also what results in Willie's downfall, as it typically does in Batman comics and shows. With that brief summary out the way, let me go ahead and bring up the 2 episodes that I'll be discussing and go over how I'll break them down. The 2 episodes we'll be looking at are Golem and Revenant. As for the breakdown, like always, I will be specifically focusing on the scenes that involve Willie, which will possibly result in some skipping within the episodes themselves, but this is just for the sake of staying focused on Willie, his personality, and psychology. With all that said, let's get right into the episode Golem. One day, Willie volunteered to be Blade's date to the dance, but before she could even decline, their conversation was interrupted by Nelson Nash, the school bully who immediately started hitting on Blade after showing off his esteemed car. Nelson then tossed Willie aside, who accidentally bumped into Nelson's prized possession, setting off the bully to beat the feeble nerd. Fortunately, Terry McGinnis showed up right on time to prevent said beating. After school, Willie went to his father's workplace in order to talk about what happened at school. During this conversation, Willie was constantly diminished and pushed over by his verbally abusive father, who lives by the motto, "If someone pushes, you push back." He refused to have a quote, "wuss for a son," so he demanded retribution, telling his son to hit the bully where it hurts. This lifelong abuse and frustration drove Willie to the edge, escalating him into taking his father's advice and stealing Golem to exact his revenge. As I said in the beginning, the abuse led to Willie's downfall, and it's actually sad to see the encounters between Willie and his father. We don't often get to see the sad happenings within the villains' lives, so them adding these scenes were not only nice details to the character, but they also add emotion to the character and the episode itself. So now, with Willie controlling the mechanical behemoth from a remote position, Willie headed straight for Nelson's car and crushed it like a Coca-Cola can. Shortly thereafter, Batman intervened and took on the robot. The fight ended when Willie inadvertently plunged the Golem's claw into an electrical cable, causing both the Golem and the headset Willie was wearing to short circuit. From that moment on, Willie gained the ability to control the machine telekinetically, with each reacting to the other's emotion. This is where Willie's mind would begin to collapse even further, as he now wears his heart on his sleeve, showing all emotions even when not meaning to. The next day, Willie was visibly depressed, either because he was defeated by the Batman, or because the revenge didn't satisfy him as he had expected. Willie then goes on to make this comment in response to what his dad had just said.
When I get my hands on a jerk who stole that Golem, I'm gonna make him sorry he was ever born.
Maybe he already is.
What was that?
As I said earlier, it's actually sad to see these moments because you, the viewer, are aware of the abuse he endures both at home and at school. And to just view Willie as a normal civilian for a second and not the villain that he'll become, it's honestly heartbreaking to see the poor kid not receive any kind of love or support the way he should. Even with him becoming a villain in mind, it's still sad to think about because he wasn't always a villain. So, after breakfast, Willie goes to school and things start looking up when Blade suddenly invites him to the dance at the pier later that night. The invitation, though, was a mere pretext to spite Nelson, who immediately reacted and threatened Willie. Consequently, this woke Golem, which had been impounded by the GCPD. With this connection established, Willie looked perplexed at the manifestation of his newfound powers and immediately understood what he had acquired. The Golem then broke out of the police building and started heading to Willie. This is where Willie starts getting lost in his newfound powers, as well as getting lost in his emotions, which we'll get into shortly. After school, Willie went to a tunnel to meet with Golem, who he could feel getting closer by the minute. However, before it arrived, Willie was intercepted by a gang of jokers who demanded tribute for his trespassing. Willie, now overconfident, scoffed at the hooligans as Golem entered the tunnel, scaring them away. Willie rejoiced as he thought with both Golem and Blade, things were finally improving for him. However, this happiness was not to last. At the dance, Willie was snubbed by Blade, who quickly fell under the charm of Nelson. The bully then took Willie outside and told him to stay away from Blade. Willie stood firm and defied Nelson, who then pushed him down the pier. The Golem immediately reacted to this and set off the tin to its other half. The disgruntled and empowered Willie headed right back to the party and summoned the Golem, running a rampage all over the amusement park. During this rampage, Willie was once again intercepted by the Batman. Before Willie could have his fun, however, Willie's father, who had seen the machine headed that way, interrupted the quarrel. At that point, Willie turned his attention in wrath onto his abusive father. And this is what I was referring to earlier when I brought up Willie getting lost in his emotions. After all the years of abuse, all the years of neglect, Willie has finally snapped and is now doing exactly what his father told him to do, which is, when someone pushes you, you push back. The only problem for his father is, he's the main one that's been pushing Willie, in multiple meanings. Seeing his father here amplified every negative emotion he was already feeling and caused him to get lost in his rage. So much so that he himself no longer views his father as his father.
But he's your father. Not for long.
However, Batman torpedoed Willie's attempt to murder his father and finally destroyed the colossal robot by making it collide with a condor ride. Willie then mourned the loss of his other half, breaking down into tears. Afterwards, Willie was sentenced to 3 years in juvenile hall, where he would develop his telekinetic powers in the subsequent months. And that about wraps up the first episode. So now, we'll be moving on to the second and final episode featuring Willie Watt, with that being Revenant. Forsaken by his family and colleagues, Willie found a way to kill time. He hit the weight machines and acquired a bulkier and more intimidating physique. No longer being the scrawny oddball he once was, Willie imprinted uneasiness on everyone around him, including the guards. Now, I am telling this out of order here because we don't actually get to see Willie within the episode for a while. But when we do, we see that Willie is no longer the same nerdy and timid person he once was. He no longer walks with his head down out of fear of being bullied, as he himself is now the bully. At some point, Willie moved on to vandalize Hamilton Hill High School, plaguing those who had beleaguered him. These inexplainable events were quickly blamed on the ghost of Garrison Jacobs. When Dana, Chelsea, and Blade tried to summon the spirit in the school's gym, they were cut short by Nelson, at which point Willie unleashed a telekinetic attack on the facility and tried to murder his old nemesis as well as Batman, who had intervened. Afterwards, Willie set off to harass his old crush, Blade, by unleashing havoc on the girls' showers and writing a eerie message on the mirror that says, "I still love you." This obviously lets us know that some part of the old Willie still remains and still harbors feelings for Blade. Sadly, Willie isn't in control of his own emotions, nor is he in control of his own actions. He's been blinded by all the pain he's endured and can now only see through the veil of rage. Upon seeing the message, Terry started suspecting that Willie was the one behind the mysterious events, so he paid him a visit at Juvenile Hall. During their conversation, Willie inadvertently made a remark about the trash gym, so Terry threw a glass of water at him, forcing him to reveal his telekinetic powers. The room was under surveillance, so when the guards barged in to apprehend Willie, he realized it was useless to keep up the charade, so he busted out. Willie was once again free in the world amongst its innocents. And this is where that veil of rage would come back into play, as instead of just trying to lay low and start anew, Willie made his way to Hamilton Hill High School, which had just been closed in fear of more attacks. Willie then went after Nelson, and the two exchanged a few blows. Even though he was more muscular, Willie still had to resort to his powers to dispose of Nelson. Afterwards, Willie made an advance on Blade, however, the get-together was interrupted by Batman, who tried to knock him out. Willie then unleashed his wrath on Batman and tried to kill him. However, Willie ultimately lost control of his powers after being hit by a batarang and got himself struck by a flying tree. Willie was then arrested and brought back into his lonesome captivity, where he was strapped with a power damper that rendered him harmless. And that would mark the end of Willie Watt. Willie is a character that you can actually feel bad for, as he wasn't meant to become this murderous criminal, and the two to blame for Willie's turn into a villain is his abusive father and Nelson. They pushed him to the edge of no return and left him with the only one option: to jump, and in doing so, lose who you once were, who you once could have been, resulting in the rage-driven Willie that we see before us. I would have loved an episode that showed Willie having a redemption arc, as he truly didn't deserve the treatment he was given. If he could have had a normal, non-abusive life, Willie most likely would have turned out just fine. So it's sad to see that he'll never have that chance to redeem himself and become something and someone better. But now, moving on to his design and voice actor. Willie's design is actually very simple and also matches the same color scheme as the Golem. Willie's styled bowl cut also adds to his awkward character, seeing as the haircut itself is a little awkward. And Willie's voice completes the overall nerd aesthetic that they were aiming for. And speaking of Willie's voice, Willie Watt was voiced by Scott McAfee. And for those that didn't know, he voiced Chris Carlisle in Batman the Animated Series, the boy in The Bump in the Night, as well as Littlefoot in The Lands Before Time 2, 3, and 4, and many other great roles. So huge shout out to Scott McAfee. With all that said though, this has been the wrathful wrongdoings of Willie Watt. If you made it this far into the video, leave a comment saying what your favorite episode of Batman Beyond is. I always love to hear y'all's opinions. Also, huge shout out to Mercenary X84 for still being a member. I really appreciate the support, so thank you from the bottom of my heart. But with all that said, it's been ugly, and I'll see y'all in the next one.